Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! We're broadcasting from New Orleans, Louisiana.
The Navy has now boarded the Mavi Marmara, where 600 civilians have been trying to deliver aid to Gaza. Live munition has been fired.
We are being hit by tear gas, stun grenades. We have Navy ships on either side and helicopters overhead. We are being attacked from every single side. This is in international waters.
Israeli soldiers storm a humanitarian aid flotilla bound for Gaza. At least 10 people are dead, dozens wounded. The attack sparked outrage around the world. Thousands take to the streets to protest in Turkey, Pakistan, London, New York. The UN Security Council condemns the attack. Turkey compares Israel's actions to state terrorism, but Israel insists its troops acted in self-defense.
What kind of peace activists use knives, clubs, fire from weapons stolen from soldiers and other weapons to attack soldiers who board the ship in accordance with international law?
Israeli actions constitute a grave breach of international law. In simplest terms, this is tantamount to banditry and piracy. It is murder conducted by a state.
We'll speak with Adam Shapiro, a board member of the Free Gaza movement. His wife, Huwaida Araf, was on the flotilla. Ali Abu Nima, the co-founder of the Electronic Intifada. Richard Falk, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Palestinian territories. And we'll go to Israel and the West Bank with Amira Haas, the Israeli journalist who's lived in the West Bank for years. All that and more coming up. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 10 peace activists have been killed in an Israeli attack on a humanitarian aid ship making its way to the Gaza Strip. It was in international waters. The Mavi Marmara was part of a flotilla organized by the Free Gaza movement, carrying nearly 700 international activists and over 10,000 tons of aid. On Monday, Israeli forces stormed the ship nearly 40 miles off the Gaza coast. In the occupied territories, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas condemned the attack as a massacre.
There is no doubt that Israel had planned for this attack, and it meant to take part in this order to put down the world and the people from supporting the Palestinians. This is why it carried out this sinful attack, in this sinful massacre against those innocent.
Hundreds of activists are being detained in an Israeli prison, and nearly 50 others have been deported. Israel has still not released the names of the dead, the injured, and detained international civilians. The United Nations Security Council has condemned actions that, quote, led to the deaths. In a statement approved after hours of deliberation, the Council also demanded the immediate release of the ships and the civilians held by Israel and called for an impartial investigation. All the permanent members of the Security Council, except for the United States, explicitly called for Israel's 3-year blockade of the Gaza Strip to be lifted. Thousands of people in cities across the world, from Turkey to Europe to the United States to Pakistan, have come out in the streets to protest the bloody attack on the humanitarian aid convoy. In Israel, the Israeli peace activist Jeff Halper denounced the attack on the ship.
These people died last night, and dozens were wounded, and this whole mission set out because governments did not do their job. It's the government's responsibility of the world and the UN to end this siege, which is illegal, which is inhumane, which is immoral. And if the governments don't do their work, people have to get up. I didn't want to get on a boat and go through the Israeli Navy and get arrested. These people didn't want to die.
We'll have more on the flotilla massacre after headlines. The Israeli attack came 2 days after signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty approved a resolution backing a nuclear-free Middle East and calling on Israel to open its nuclear sites to international inspection. The measure was approved by consensus by all 189 NPT signatories, including the United States. Egypt's ambassador to the UN, Majid Abdelaziz, hailed it as a major step forward.
The road ahead is not easy, but it is the only way forward. Today's reaffirmation by the conference of the importance of Israel's accession to the treaty and the placement of all its nuclear facilities under IAEA comprehensive safeguards confirms the continued resolve of the states parties to pursue the 1995 and 2000 commitments in this respect.
Israel is the only Middle East state not to have signed the NPT. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected the measure, calling it biased for excluding Iran. The Gulf Coast oil spill is now expected to continue gushing until August after BP's failed attempt to plug the leak in the underwater well. White House climate and energy and climate advisor Carol Browner issued the warning Sunday during an appearance on CBS's Face the Nation. Browner said the spill is likely the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history.
This is probably the biggest environmental disaster we've ever faced in this country. It's certainly the biggest oil spill, and we're responding with the biggest environmental response. There could be oil coming up till August when the relief wells are dug. I think, David, it's important to know that there's not just one being dug. There are two, because we insisted, the government insisted, that there be a second one in case something went wrong with the first one.
Last week, BP tried to stop the leak by pumping heavy drilling mud into the well, a procedure known as top kill. But experts now fear the operation may have further damaged the well and its blowout preventer, threatening further efforts. Government scientists, meanwhile, are now warning the spill could threaten two neighboring states. On Monday, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said heavy winds this week could move oil towards the Mississippi and Alabama coasts. BP has vowed to clean up the spill, but is now trying to deny aspects of its environmental damage. On Sunday, BP's Tony Hayward, the CEO, was quoted disputing experts' claims to have discovered oil plumes trapped in large quantities and spreading miles underseas. Hayward said, quote, "The oil is on the surface. There aren't any plumes." Hayward also told reporters he doubts scores of workers and fishermen have gotten sick from the toxic dispersants used to break up the oil in the water. He instead said the workers had suffered food poisoning.
I'm sure they were genuinely ill, but whether it was anything to do with dispersants and oil, whether it was food poisoning or some other reason for them being ill, you know, food poisoning is clearly a big issue when you've got, you know, concentration of this number of people in temporary camps, temporary accommodation. It's something we have to be very, very mindful of. It's one of the big issues of keeping the army operating. You know, armies march on their stomachs.
A number of workers involved in the cleanup have been hospitalized. Hayward's comments came shortly after he publicly complained about the disaster's impact on his personal life.
For the massive disruption it's caused to their lives. And, you know, there's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. You know, I'd like my life back.
BP is under continued criticism here in Louisiana. On Sunday, hundreds of people marched in New Orleans to protest BP's control of the spill response. The New Orleans musician, Dr. John, said BP shouldn't be in charge of the cleanup.
Killing 11 people is a crime, and why they're still in charge of the crime site. I'm upset because they knew, BP Oil knew since March, that the shutoff valves weren't working and the rubber was disintegrating around this. And I find that, of course, they're a big corporation, and all they kept telling all of the people working on it was keep drilling.
The Washington Post is reporting the U.S. is drawing up new plans for a possible unilateral strike in Pakistan in the event of a successful attack on U.S. soil. The options under consideration include air and missile strikes, as well as the deployment of U.S. Special Operations Forces deployed along Pakistan's border with Afghanistan. The U.S. has recently established a joint intelligence center with Pakistan in the northwestern city of Peshawar and is in talks for a second center in the city of Quetta. The Washington Post reports the intelligence centers are partly aimed to make Pakistan, quote, more dependent on U.S. intelligence and less likely to curtail